Every evening, almost without fail, my 13-year-old son listens to his favorite songs. Not only does Zach listen to his favorite songs, but he also sings along to them, almost word perfect. And every so often, he changes his selection. This year, it's included everyone from Miriam Makeba to Public Enemy, Mikasa, to, everyone, Dr. Dre, the stuff that kids are listening to these days. I'd like to think that Zach's breakaway from the music categorization that was the hallmark of music consumption during apartheid has everything to do with me, his mother, a music journalist, and his father, a music publisher. But the truth is that Zach's music choices are as much an expression of the liberation of the mind that the past 20 years of democracy has given to the children of his generation, the millennials. Together with his friends at the government school that he goes to, just down the road here in Craig Hall, he is absorbing culture in an intuitive way, in a way that knows no boundaries and is informed by diversity. It's a wonderful thing to witness, and it's even more powerful if you think of the death of Nelson Mandela last night. I'm at least a generation away from my son, but I consider myself very fortunate to have been able to write about music for almost as long as we've had a democracy in this country. During that time, I've written about South African artists for many different homegrown publications, and I've also reported on the South African and the African music industries internationally when I was the correspondent for Billboard magazine for over 10 years. Since December 2011, when we launched our first edition, I've been the music editor of Rolling Stone South Africa. For the first time, writers like myself have the space to capture the real stories of South African music in a way that we've never been able to before. During my years as a music journalist, I've written about the resurgence of rock in the 90s when the Springbok Nude Girls led the charge. I've watched Trompies usher Kwaito into life in an abandoned cinema in Orange Grove, and as TKZ played the unofficial World Cup anthem, Shibobo, in a hotel bar. I've been thrilled by musicians who have created a sound all of their own. Bongo Muffin, Mafiki Zolo, Penny Penny, Chris Letcher, Dear Reader, Sipho Kazi, Vusi Mahlasela, Black Coffee. The list is endless, and I'm sure you recognize some of those names. I've also traveled to a jail to interview the people's poet, Mzwaki Mbuli. I visited Rebecca Malopi at home, and I've tramped through those very, very dusty streets of Opikopi to hear Laurie Levine play as the sun set. I've seen as legends have had to make way for young upstarts coming behind them, and as celebrities have decided their next logical step was a music career that was over almost as quickly as it began. But I've also watched very gifted individuals like my friend TK and others, like Brenda Fassie, like Umanji, like James Phillips, die far too young. But in nearly 2 decades, I can count on my one hand the number of artists who have truly broken through to capture a substantial international audience with a creative output that warrants and merits their long-term interest. If the names Ladysmith Black Mambazo and Soweto Gospel Choir spring to your mind, let me stop you there. I'm not talking about these kind of artists. The fact is that there will always be a global audience wanting to hear expressions of the ancient. They are not creating music that is representing South Africa now, Their music is unlikely to change in the next 10 or even 100 years. It is also music that the South African government tends to go to when they're looking for music to best represent the country outside. But there's also a new level of artists who are making steady inroads into the UK, into the USA, into Europe, and into Africa. These artists should be performing alongside the leading figures in the established genres of the world. For instance, Durban's Hines brothers are worthy of the kind of attention given to Australia's crowded house.
Baby, I've been trying lately. Won't you try and see me for myself? I'm bleeding deep inside, I'm weeping. Won't you try and free?
BCUC have a sprawling energy that for me puts them alongside Canada's Arcade Fire, a kind of Fela Kuti meets the Fugees.
Mr. Fundamental, have you got in the war? Yes, yes, yes. I've got more than 3 times. One is for the master. One is for the little boy. Police down the road.
And Nakane Tori's otherworldly music harks back to the beauty of Jeff Buckley, or even more recently, Bon Iver. There are also those very successful South African musicians who have reached the ceiling here and are looking for ways to break outwards, even if it means starting all over again. Prime Circle and Lyra, both a decade into their career, are 2 very good examples of this. And then there are those musicians who have taken on the attributes of mainstream music so well that they have become success stories overseas, like Seether. Over the 2 decades I've been writing about music, I've come to know one thing for sure. The bravery of following a music career in South Africa is to be admired and supported. But I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about those artists who are prepared to take up what Diane Coetzer refers to as the leading role of artists. The writer made his point in a letter to Paul Auster that is contained in this book, Here and Now. He wrote, "Something happened, it seems to me, in the late 1970s or early 1980s, as a result of which the arts yielded up their leading role in our inner life. I am quite prepared to give heed to the diagnoses of what happened between then and now that have a political or economic or world historical character, but I do nevertheless feel that there was a general failure amongst writers and artists to resist the challenge to their leading role, and that we are poorer for that today." Why is this? It could be said in South Africa that the general failure is partly due to the willful insistence by the ANC government on the arts being about a single experience, one that they have decided on. As worthy as they are, social cohesion and nation building in the hands of the ANC frequently excludes the individual perspective, as the furore around the painting The Spear showed us. Political correctness is another reason that artists reject their leading role. This happens the world over, but in a country like ours, where any deviation from the prescribed narrative is seen as almost treasonous, it is felt more keenly. It's left then to the rule shifters and shape breakers to take up their leading role, and in doing so, induce a seismic shift in the way that outsiders come to view, see, and experience South Africa. Who are these artists? For me, they are best represented by Abdullah Ibrahim and Die Antwoord. In music, they are the ones who are living up to art's noble romance with outlaws. They are our uncontainable, explosive creators who live by the code. To live outside the law, you must be honest. That line is from Absolutely Sweet Marie, a song by Bob Dylan, who was one of the original rule shifters and shape breakers in modern music. In Subterranean Homesick Blues, Dylan also writes, "Don't follow leaders and watch the parking meters." In those 8 lines, he describes what it is to be an artist taking a leading role in our inner life. An examination of the careers of Diane Coetzer and Abdullah Ibrahim will show that they answer to no one, no critic, no industry, no official, no arbiter of taste. They answer only to their own creative vision. They are not interested in explaining or justifying their work because the work always stands on its own. The work is always judged against their own standard of excellence. But, as Dylan puts it, both these artists still watch the parking meters because alongside their pursuit of artistic purity, these artists are both attached to the old-fashioned concept of work. They just keep doing it, doing it, doing it, the creating, the rapping, the playing, the struggle. In the case of Abdullah Ibrahim, even at the age of nearly 80. Like Hero in the fabulous documentary Hero Dreams of Sushi, they know that their next creation will contain a little more of the truth, a truth that is far more experiential than describable, a truth that always transcends. There's another Dylan lyric, "Thunder on the mountain, rolling like a drum. I'm going to sleep over there. It's where the music's coming from." It's a beautiful lyric, which suggests the sacrifices and dangers involved in choosing art above everything else, to decide to be always and only where the music's coming from. In boldly willing their vision into being, these artists challenge orthodoxies and disrupt narratives, especially the less complex one that we as South Africans cling to. For all of this, they are rewarded at home very often with a bitter incredulousness at the acclaim that they are receiving overseas. Their act of artistic distancing is seen as rudeness, of not playing the game, whether it's the one decided by the critics or the industry or the country. Is this narrowness a particularly South African trait? I tend to think it is, but it's also a reminder of how human beings have been educated out of understanding what true artistic purity is and what it entails. But in rising above the quotidian, these artists give us the thrilling, exhilarating thing that art offers, but very seldom delivers. You might argue that Abdullah Ibrahim doesn't really fit here, that he belongs in the same category as Ladysmith or Soweto Gospel Choir, but you would be wrong. Over 5 decades or more, he's been searching, seeking, exploring with an artistic integrity that is quite singular. Die Antwoord are no different, but they do stand alone in South Africa in the number of outsiders that they bring with them, in the way that they're able to transcend their South Africanness while never failing to communicate it. You could measure this in the fact that earlier this year they became the first South African act to sell out the Brixton Academy in London. You could also measure it in the fact that they have more cumulative views for their YouTube videos than any other South African, and this number now stands at over 100 million. I Think You Freaky alone has more than 39 million views on YouTube. That's more than half the population of South Africa.
I think you're freaky and I like you a lot.
That little girl jumping at the end was my daughter, Emilu. I think you can also measure their cultural impact with everything from Rihanna's new hairstyle to their starring roles as themselves in Neil Blomkamp's new movie, Chappie. For me, both De Antwoord and Abdullah are intrinsically spiritual in their conviction that creativity is its own reward and that it's a passage to and perhaps even beyond meaning. Are there any others waiting in the wings? Well, Trevor knows one. To the disapproval of many of his peers, Trevor hasn't followed the comedy script of years and years and years of paying his dues in small clubs. His rise has been fast and furious, but you can be sure he's also watching the parking meters. He's also putting in the hard graft. It'll be fascinating to see if Trevor can take it all the way, like the American comedian Louis C.K. Blackjacks are another. They take to the stage with all the authoritative swagger of The Clash, and they visit musical destinations that are beyond Radiohead and Hendrix. Are there others? Well, perhaps the visual artist William Kentridge and Philip Tabani. For me, his Malombo music should surely be given the recognition that has been given to Fela Kuti's Afrobeat. I leave you with this thought. For all its gnarled, awkward South Africanness, the massively successful Freaky is an updated, but no less universal expression of the utopian message in John Lennon's Imagine, written many, many years ago.
I think you're freaky and I like you a lot. I think you're freaky and I like you a lot. I think you're freaky and I like you a lot. I think you're freaky and I like you a lot.
Thank you.